Welcome back to Camera Conversations optimized by Pure Sport, and today is a solo special. It's time I come clean with you. I took the leap, and it didn't necessarily happen as it was planned. Things rarely do, but the leap I've taken is to go full time with sales coaching, consulting, and of course, this wonderful podcast. And before we get into this episode, I want you to consider right at the very start, what would you do tomorrow if what you considered your security or safety net was pulled from underneath you, or it just plain disappeared? And I want you to think about that as we get into today's episode. Like all good stories, let's start at the beginning to give you a little bit of context. Anyone that's been around here for a little while knows that I made the move from the bright lights and the blue suits of insurance in 2021 to the world of furniture sales at a business called David Phillips. And many of the sales specials that I've done over the last 2 years, episode 257, episode 319 in this very studio here in London, were about the sales results that I generated over that period of time. Last year, 1.7 million, the year before that, 1.1, the year before that, 850K. And I had a really, really good time. And I found a vehicle where I could apply my sales skills, which I developed over the past 8 years prior to that, in an arena where I could really push forward in terms of revenue for that business and, of course, commission and income for me. If we fast forward, at the end of the September period, when the vast majority of my installs went in 2024, and I pretty much was sitting on 1.6.5 million prior to the end of the financial year in April 25, some challenges started to come up within that business where suppliers who make and manufacture the furniture which we were installing and supplying were not being paid on time. And that was a little bit of a red flag and a challenge for my relationship with those customers and what that meant for moving forward. However, I was continually given reassurances that we were going to be in the right space come the busy summer period 2025. And I took that as gospel. And I also knew that on the side, I was building up Camera Conversations, the biggest and best it's ever been, but also was doing a lot more of my sales coaching consulting, which I'd sort of fallen into in 2022 with a couple of different job offers. When people wanted me to join their business, I instead coached their team and supported them for a few different companies. When you have your foundations rocked or shaken, you have to consider what you're going to do about that. And for me, I decided I was going to sit tight and aim to deliver well over £1 million again for this financial year, so 2025 into 2026. The pipeline looked great. The pipeline looked really strong. A lot of my existing customers stayed loyal despite some of the challenges around supply chain at the end of the September period into October. But things took a further turn when in June 2025, we were called on to an all hands call, which is every person in the company, over 200 employees, were called on with the CEO to be told that due to some financial situations and outstanding HMRC debt, that the business had taken the decision to submit the intention to appoint an administrator. Now, careful form words there. That does not mean that they appointed an administrator, but it did buy them 14 days in which to look at other investors to come into the business to sit alongside the two existing private equity firms which owned the business. As you can tell from the way the story's going, it was not good news because automatically everyone's role is placed up for redundancy. Anyone that has really, really delved back in the archive, or if you're a proper Cambro OG, my first ever solo episode was episode 15, and I spoke about a redundancy I went through at the age of 26 in 2019 and what that meant for me, my life, and what I did at that point in time. And so alarm bells were ringing, and it seemed unlikely that a rescue bid would come in, albeit there were really large profitable parts of that business. The area of the business that I was a sales director for was very profitable indeed. We did just under 4 million quid in that financial year, where I did 1.7 with the girl that worked in my team, and some of the house accounts delivering the remainder of that amount at over a 47-48% margin. So extremely profitable indeed. And when something like that happens, it is disconcerting, especially when you're planning to have a really good summer for the business, but also for yourself fiscally and the commission that was going to come with that. So when that was announced, alarm bells are ringing. There's some talk that areas of the business will be saved. There might be Phoenix companies. There might be a third investor come in and rescue the business because there were, like I say, really good parts to it. Well, of course, there were other areas that were significantly underperforming and not doing what they should have done. So when that message is conveyed, I have a bit of a limbo period in those 14 days where the investors are looking for another investor or they're looking for strategies to get out of it and to come out the other side with the resources intact. For those that are from a football background, many of you listening in Glasgow will be a kind of the David Phillips in the same way that Rangers Football Club, my team, became the Rangers Football Club in 2020 in 2012 with some company changes in behind that. When that happens, it's very disconcerting. And as things transpired, we then had a further call on the 15th of July where we were told by the CEO that the business was not going to be saved and that everyone would be being made redundant and the business would go through an administration and likely a liquidation event. That sort of news is never good, never positive, and it doesn't feel good. But anyone that knows me, and I'll reflect on some of the conversations that I had as we go through this episode, knew that I had been building what I would call the parachute for a very long time with the podcast and with the sales coaching business and the consulting work I was doing. But it doesn't take away from the disappointment of having that safety net of a regular solid salary and, of course, the massive upside of commission for a book of business that I'd spent the best part of 4 years building, retaining and growing during that time. And the emotions swirling around were, of course, disappointment with the leadership and how it had been run. Personally, some anger at, I mean, if we're blatant, probably about 50K over the next 4 to 5 months of both salary and commission combined, pre-tax, taken away from me. But also a weird sense of relief because if you've been paying close attention to LinkedIn or to my Instagram stories, you'll have seen that even while at David Phillips, the sales coaching business was growing with the testimonials I was sharing, with the workshops people saw me delivering, and the plan. And plans are all well and good. And I think is it Mike Tyson said that everyone's got a plan to get punched in the face. I had the plan that come November time, after all the big installs had happened, after all the commission had come in, that I would look to go full time with sales coaching. But it came earlier than planned. And that leap that I mentioned right at the top of the episode, it happened quicker than planned. That was not always the obvious choice because many with my track record and my CV would know that other businesses in that sector, or maybe even other sectors that have approached me in the past, would have maybe hired me as a sales director or a head of business development or some other role like that where they knew I could come in and produce. But the choice that I made was to go all in on the sales coaching and choose that as my full-time vehicle. Going all in means that I have all those hours that I would spend on my day job to now allocate to the thing which feels amazing. I know that I'm good at. I know I can contribute in, and I know can be a success. But it doesn't make it any less challenging or shocking when you're almost forced to do so. And I consider myself to be in a fortunate position compared to perhaps colleagues who, of course, will go back into that job market in a time when Britain is in economic decline, and we can discuss in another episode why that is. And having no inclination to say yes to fallback options with other employers was something that I was very firm on. And that might sound crazy, especially with some of the roles that I spoke to immediately off the back of it, when you are, of course, naive not to explore those options. I just knew that now is the time. And sometimes it's better to be pushed than to jump on your own terms. And from over 320 episodes in the podcast at the time of recording, so many of the best stories and best businesses and best results that my guests have come from a moment where their hand has been a little bit forced. And my hand was a little bit forced. But the genuine excitement I felt, mixed with disappointment, but probably far more excitement, was that it's go time, Colin. That guy that you tell yourself you are, that individual that you hold yourself up as online and offline, it's time to prove that you are that guy and you're going to be able to do this properly. And recording in early September, around 6 weeks on from the business winding up on the 15th of July, I've proven that to myself over and over and over again, every day, every week, with the clients I'm working with the revenue that's generated, with the results and testimonials I'm getting from those clients, which is such an important feedback loop to have. It was time to step up, and I had to do that. These days, it feels like every brand is shouting about how supplements are the answer to everything and all your problems. Before you jump on the latest wellness trend, it's worth remembering the foundations and basics come first. Hydration, good nutrition, rest, movement are the real keys. When you do decide to supplement, however, what you choose really does matter. You know I'm a big fan of removing toxins and unnecessary things from your lifestyle, and I ensure that my supplements are free from additives, artificial flavors, and any unnecessary, dirty, toxic fillers. Personally, having seen many professional athletes and top performers utilize their products, I decided to give Pure Sport supplements a go. Their products are built on science-backed information, minimal ingredients, and they do exactly what they're meant to. Whether it's their best-selling ultra electrolytes to keep you hydrated and energized, their deep magnesium to support with quality sleep, or even their natural testosterone boosting Tonka Ali, I trust that what they make is developed to care for me and my body. Explore the full range of Pure Sport supplements at the link in the show notes, puresport.co, and use the code CAMBRO10 for 10% off. I want to share some of the lessons from this that people can take away from it, both in terms of business, in terms of mindset, in terms of career, depending where you're at in your life. And the first thing I'll speak about is business lessons from watching a big corporate business like that with a £50 million turnover go to the wall because it didn't do the things it needed to do to survive and to thrive. And the first of those is a very similar lesson to I spoke about in the last sales special on 319. Profit comes before revenue, and it must always do so. I had a front row seat watching a business chase revenue and top line numbers and potentially vanity projects that contributed to its ultimate demise. And when I talk about the division that I was a part of growing, and my colleague Dan, who worked there previously with me before, when we both joined in 2020, 2021, we knew that we could grow something that would increase in revenue, but was at a really profitable base between 45 and 52% across the 4 years that we were running things. Whereas there were other areas of the business that quite simply didn't have that approach to sales, and they had far bigger overheads, they had far tighter margins. And from a business perspective, I know that when it comes to running my coaching business, I'm making sure it's extremely lean, extremely efficient, extremely profitable for every deal that I do. I do have overheads, and we'll maybe talk about those as this goes through, but they're nowhere near what they might be when you're in other sectors. And furniture is a sector that, of course, will have overheads with operations, customer service, products team, services team, these different areas that need to be there in order for you to fulfill in those deals that I make and I sell. However, when that gets out of control and the cost base is too large, you really need to recognize that just revenue for the sake of it is such an error to chase. And instead, we must sometimes take a step backwards in revenue to increase the profitability of the numbers that you are doing. And that is a far better approach. I mentioned the term vanity projects, and a phrase that Jimmy Carr used on Modern Wisdom. And who knew Jimmy Carr was such a precise and eloquent self-development guest when, of course, he's known best for his comedy, but he certainly is that. He spoke around making sure that something grows corn. And by that, it means it has a use case or a value to it rather than just being done for the sake of it. And many vanity projects that big corporate businesses chase, or even smaller businesses, can fall into this trap as well. Activity that looks good or feels good or is a publicity boost does not always necessarily feed the bottom line, does not necessarily help the business grow in the way that you want it to. And David Phillips expanded really aggressively. It had its UK operations. It was probably the top supplier into the residential market for furniture in the UK. It expanded to Dubai, expanded to Australia, expanded to Hong Kong. And while I didn't have all the facts and figures to hand, as a sales director of one particular area of that business, those were things where the business was going out over its skis and expanding into territory that maybe wasn't particularly necessary. And I know that maybe some of the areas they expanded into in the UK as well were areas that didn't produce the same results as the student accommodation sector produced, as perhaps the build to rent sector produced, because those were areas of the UK residential market which were growing and needed a really reliable supplier, which we were able to be. So when you consider your own business or you consider a business that you work for, watch out for those red flags of projects that people undertake for the sake of it, to look good or to feel good, to boost egos, to stroke egos, to make them feel more important than they potentially are, and avoid them at all costs. I know, for example, with some of my sales coaching, there's a number of different projects which I could dive into that would maybe look fantastic on LinkedIn, but would they be profitable for me to undertake? Maybe not. Would they be valuable for me to deliver to my customer base? Maybe not. But would it get me kudos, if we're to use a Strava term? Or would it get me encouragement from the online dopamine hits of likes and comments? Quite possibly. But I can tell you from having watched from a front row seat people chase ego-driven goals at the behest of the business thriving the way it should have done, that will not be a mistake that I'll be making. One of the other business lessons I want to discuss is knowing when to say yes and knowing when to say no. There is such an importance and value in having a strategy where you can be ruthless by committing to the things that you know, quote unquote, grow corn or have value, and say no to those things that don't necessarily do that. And that can be things like downsizing in particular areas. It can be things like doubling down in an area that we know is doing really, really well. Saying yes to those things and saying no to those others is so important that you have that resolute, clear decision making and commitment to a decision once you make it. And again, when I reflect on some of the things that I witnessed and some of the things that I'm now doing within my business and some of the businesses that I consult for, I know that when somebody makes a decision, they should come from the logical space, they should come from the rational space. Of course, we as humans are emotional and there are emotional ties to decisions we make, but rely heavily on the data, rely heavily on the impact of something that will happen. And when you make a decision, be firm in your stance on it and give it time afterwards to see the benefit of the decision you made, while also being ruthless enough to pull the plug on something that quite simply is not what it should be and is not producing the results that you hope it would. One of the things that I was talking to my friend and fellow podcast host, David McIntosh, who was a fantastic guest on this show a couple of years ago, and I'm sure we'll do another couple of episodes in each other's show in the coming years. He asked me this double question. And the first part of it was, what's the hardest thing for you to admit off the back of this situation? And what part of it shook you the most? And I'll answer both at the same time if that's helpful. I think the hardest thing to admit was that the red flags were there during October time when suppliers weren't paid on time. But also, I knew that I could still produce a result if the business just performed as it should have done or as it was promised it would do. And what shook me the most is that people in very experienced roles who should perhaps have known better were unable to ensure that things ticked along as hoped. And it's disappointing that that was the case. And when you get these curveballs, when you get these lessons, when you witness these things, the most important thing is to learn secondhand. So many of the guests that come on the podcast that share stories of their low points, their challenges, and the different things that come up for them, we listen an hour a week or 2 hours a week, however often you listen to Cambro. We listen and try and learn secondhand from the mistakes of others. And I'm definitely going to look to do that. I don't want to fall into the same traps that I've witnessed. I don't want to watch something that should have been a success that turned into a failure become that failure and not learn from what I should do and what we should do differently off the back of it. The next section I want to get into is being prepared and not panicked by the challenges that come up in our life. One of my coaching clients recently, he's looking to launch something else as a second arm to his business, and it makes total sense. But a few curveballs have happened in his personal life, which have meant it's been pushed back. And we were speaking yesterday over WhatsApp, and I was saying to him that when the storm comes, we must be as ready as possible. And a phrase that Dr. Arya, one of my favorite guests I've had on the podcast, used in 2023 is that when the storm comes, be ready to dance in the rain. Or the kind of follow up to that was that we will bleed in training so that we don't die in battle. And I think a lot of my life has been set up around making me as resilient as possible albeit I've spoken many times. I had an amazing upbringing in a middle class household in Bearsden, a leafy suburb of Glasgow. But what you can do is condition yourself as much as possible through things like your exercise, through things like your diet, through things like your lifestyle habits around sleep, content you consume, to be ready to deal with the challenges that are going to come your way, because inevitably they will come. Now, those challenges could vary massively depending on what you're exposed to, and they can be at one end of the spectrum or another end of the spectrum. So redundancy is something that I wouldn't wish on anyone. It's not a great position to be in. If I think back to 2019, I just got a mortgage from my brother for the flat we live in Bearsden. I just moved from a sector where I was a little bit the golden boy, been there for 4 years, had grown the book of business, was really, really well supported, to another business called Aspen that was bought by an American hedge fund 12 weeks into my time there. And they made the entire UK operation redundant despite it being super profitable. So a slightly different redundancy to the one that I've just gone through. And at that point in time, I relied heavily on the different anchors and habits in my life to try and be the guy that I said I was going to be and recover well from any setback that I got. In the same way, you might be going through a breakup, a divorce, a death or bereavement in your family. When these awful experiences come, we must have things in our life which we can cling on to or anchor us to the floor, to the ocean bed, and make us feel as steady or as calm as we possibly can. For me, that's things like treating your sleep like gold and really valuing it and protecting it and making it a non-negotiable. It's fueling your body with good foods, with movement and the right supplementation, which many of you know I'm a big proponent of. It's having a practice of getting your thoughts and your ideas and your feelings down on paper on a daily basis, but also summarizing that and capturing that weekly. And some of the journal entries I've got from the last 6 weeks have been really helpful in doing that. But the writing that I was doing for the weeks, months, and years prior to that also set me up to be able to articulate and have a practice for myself to check in. It's feeding your mind with the right content. And I maybe hinted at this situation in the last solo Q&A where I spoke about being very selective of what I was consuming. So spending a lot less time on X because of the content around the state of the UK at the moment, the immigration situation, the safety situation. It was just making me angry and it was using up bandwidth. So freeing that up and making sure that I was feeding into podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube videos, which made me feel some kind of way. And even the music I was listening to, and I joked that I was listening to exclusively 120 BPM house music, not just because I was going to Ibiza at the end of the month, but also because it lifted me up. And songs are spells, music dictates mood. Use that accordingly. Don't be binge listening to Dido or Adele or maybe country music where they're singing about a lost love, because that will lower your frequency and your vibration. And I'm really appreciative of the likes of Rob Bank, who's a creator in this space, who speaks about how important it is the music you listen to is for how you feel about yourself and how you get on. And previous guest on the show, TJ Power, is massive on dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. Singing in the shower to a housey track that's upbeat and is inspiring and motivational and makes you feel great is a fantastic way to release those endorphins, and those carry through the rest of the day when it comes to dealing with perhaps the challenges that have come up through a bereavement, a breakup, a redundancy, a curveball in life that you didn't possibly expect. Alongside feeding your mind with that is also sticking to some of the small habits that you know work well for you. So for me, that's having an app blocker on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn between 9 a.m. and midday when I do the vast majority of my deep work, my presentation writing for clients, my outbound email for new prospects, my coaching calls for existing clients. And having different small habits in place that I reinforce on a daily basis, those compound and the consistency adds up massively to make you feel in the best possible position and the most resilient position to deal with any challenges that do come up. The last thing I'll mention, and I want to be as fair with this as possible and certainly won't name any names, but detach from drama. So if there's gossiping in your friend group about she did this, he did that, or what I was exposed to, people being made redundant, being angry and upset about leadership, being angry and upset about promises and things that were told to them in the same way that I felt in some level. But when you speak about these things over and over and over again, they become a far bigger part of your reality. And I was simply not going to let that happen. In fact, I wanted to make sure that anything that was coming up negatively about my work situation was completely compartmentalized into a different area of life. Again, it depends on how frequently you listen to my show and whether this is one of your first ones, but I've only ever spoken about this once in the podcast and then once as a guest on somebody else's podcast. My mum was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2017 into 2018, and I quite simply compartmentalized that into one part of my life. I didn't let it impact my work, didn't let it impact my training, didn't let it impact my social life. And we spoke about it behind closed doors as a family to support mum through that period as much as possible. And when you do that, you empower yourself to not let it become the domino effect. So the domino to fall and knock down all the other dominoes in all those other areas of your life. Compartmentalizing drama and disregarding maybe negative messages or negative conversations as much as possible. I spoke recently to George Perez in the show, who has a book called The Shut the Fuck Up Method. And a lot of that was around not allowing negativity and challenging, unpleasant discussions to permeate other areas and to not allow it to spread and infect other areas of your life. So, for example, if somebody messaged me off the back of the redundancy that I'd worked with and they were upset about things that had happened, I would just acknowledge their message, but I wouldn't continue the conversation. I wouldn't allow it to snowball. I wouldn't get dragged into, oh, that character in my work, he was an idiot. What on earth was he doing? What was he playing at? Or that PE house that owned us, what were they thinking when they made this decision? I didn't allow that to be the case in those first 6 weeks because, as much as possible, I needed to assign my bandwidth and my energy to the things that mattered the most, which was number one, going all in on coaching, securing new clients, delivering fantastic results for those clients, looking after my mind, looking after my body, still showing up for my friends and family that I know need me as an individual on a daily basis to be a strong, resilient individual. And when we do that, we don't allow maybe a negative message or a WhatsApp from somebody who's maybe struggling to bring you down as well. You can still be an encouraging, supportive force for them without getting dragged into the slagging, the gossiping, and the bitching that can often come with those conversations. And you truly will rewire your brain to get away from the drama and become abundant and focused on the task at hand. And I needed maximum bandwidth for the last 6 weeks to prove that this coaching thing can work on a full-time basis. And touch wood, this lovely wooden table that I'm sat at just now, that has been the case. I've been able to do that. I've been able to have record revenue in July, record revenue in August, build up a pipeline of amazing businesses, amazing individuals that I want to work with and coach and support in their sales, and really kick on from there. If I had given away any of my energy to things that didn't serve that, I would have looked back on that period with regret and shame and also disappointment in myself for how I conducted myself. I want you to think about that again. Just let's pause there while I take a drink. As much as possible, I needed to keep the thing, keep the goal. Prioritize the dial moving activities. Do not get drawn into things that take you away from the place that you should be. And that was the priority for those 6 weeks. It's going to be a priority moving forward as well. But in particular, in those 6 weeks, all that mattered was those particular actions and movements in the right direction. I maintained my training, I maintained my diet, I maintained my sleep, I maintained my supportive relationships with those around me that I really cared about. But I cut away an awful lot of the fat. I didn't let anything else seep in. I didn't end up in debates on X or TikTok with woke lefties that won't serve me. I focused on the things that really, really mattered to me. More leads, more meetings, more quotes, more proposals, and closing a higher percentage of those. That's exactly what it's time to unlock with my sales masterclass. I've distilled down over 15 years of sales experience across B2B and B2C into some actionable lessons which you can benefit from. Clients that I've worked with one-to-one over the last 6 to 18 months have had incredible results, and it's now time for me to share with you an easier way to work with me rather than on a one-to-one basis. To get involved, hit the link in the show notes or under this description, wherever you're watching this, to join today's waiting list, and there's even some free goodies in there for you while you wait for the course to go live. The next thing I want to discuss is why I chose sales coaching as the vehicle, because of course I could have gone and got another job within sales and across many different industries. I could have pivoted to maybe some of the other entrepreneurial paths that I've explored. So be that property, be that crypto, be that pushing the podcast or maybe perhaps doing some more YouTube style content beyond just the podcast, maybe vlogging and stuff like that, or even other temptations in life which have called me before, like online fitness coaching, where I've got tremendous expertise and could certainly deliver great results for people. Sales coaching was the one for me because it's so closely linked to a skill set that I have real expertise and value to give in helping people sell better, communicate better, structure their process and their growth, help them to systematize a lot of what is seen as a bit of a magical art. People think, oh, people buy from people and salespeople are just brilliant talkers. I disagree strongly with that. And instead, I believe that with the right processes and structures and the right frameworks, people can put their own personality, regardless whether that's introverted, extroverted, or whether they're outgoing or ingoing, or whether they're somebody that's a particularly enthusiastic person or somebody that's a bit more serious. There's so much to be gained from having those repeatable frameworks and processes and systems in place that you can be a success regardless of how you're particularly wired. I knew I had that skill set, and I knew that I could communicate through the skills I've developed through the podcast and through selling for the last 12 years into B2B and B2C. I knew I could communicate and instill those in other people. And I think one of the big problems you see with coaching a lot of the time is they try and make whoever they're coaching into the Aldi or the B-Tech version of themselves and try and create little clones of themselves. Instead, I would always say, you're not going to become the Aldi or the B-Tech Colin in sales. You're going to become the 2.0 version of yourself, because we're going to arm you with frameworks and processes that can be you rather than just trying to sound like me, which I think is a big challenge. Sales coaching is also inherently valuable. So from a fiscal perspective, businesses, individuals, sales teams will invest in it because there's a massive ROI, a massive return on investment over the other side of it. And that's not necessarily the case in some other businesses or other areas that I might have gone into. So not only did I know that I have a skill set and a communication style that can work, but also I know that I can generate real value at the back end, which allows me to justify pricing, which dictates a percentage of that return that somebody's going to get, meaning that there's value in the exchange. Anything you're selling, there must be a massive upside versus the cost to the person purchasing. There's a free sales lesson for you. Beyond that was the reassurance and satisfaction with the results I was getting for people before I'd gone full time. So when I was quote unquote building the parachute, I was also parachute to leap out of the burning building that was the furniture business. I also had below it what I call the launch pad in order to go upwards. And that was amazing testimonials and results for the people I've been working with for the 18 to 24 months that I've been doing sales coaching ad hoc. That was so reassuring. And in particular, guys like Taylor McDonald, Nick McNally, Factory Weights, Love Your Projects. These guys had all seen big financial return from the workshops and this implementation calls that we'd done in the prior months. And having those there allowed me to see that clients could take action on what I was teaching, implement it rather than being confused and given more information they knew what to do with, and win off the back of it, generate more revenue off the back of it, generate more sales, be more profitable. Keyword profit. When that was there, it combined with these other things like my skill set, my communication skills, to know that this was something worth pursuing. This was something that I can contribute in, I can add value in the same way if I consider why I've spent so much time on the podcast over the last 5 years, when financially it really has just been something I've invested back into rather than ever taking money out of and distracting from. It's because I knew I could contribute in this space as a podcaster. I knew I could have good interviews. I knew I could secure great guests. I knew I could ask good questions. I knew I could research deeper than the vast majority of hosts that you see in a surface level. And I knew that the community of people listening to the podcast, with the feedback, the reviews, the ratings, the shares, and the messages that I get on a daily and a weekly basis from people being impacted, all encouraged me to keep going. Sales coaching was exactly the same. I genuinely feel a real mission-led purpose to what I'm doing, because I know that the average sales interaction and process within a business is actually pretty poor, from being involved in lots of businesses where we've had to restructure it, and both as an employee but now as a consultant. I know that there's so much upside to come. And when you can help ambitious, brilliant owners of businesses to level up themselves and their team to get to the next level, to take that next step, that feels so good. And again, I spoke about this really recently with the episode with Adam Ash, which I know many of you have enjoyed and listened to. But Dr. Yusuf Smith taught me about the four currencies. Currency number one, money. Currency number two, freedom of time. Currency number three, freedom of location. Currency number four, fulfillment, purpose, satisfaction. When I look at my coaching business, I know fiscally, from a money perspective, it can do really well because it's a valuable service for people to purchase. It's got relative freedom of time in terms of I can pick when we run the workshops or when we run those coaching calls. Freedom of location for all the online stuff, that's very, very much the case. Whereas a lot for the workshops, that's not the case. But I love doing those in person. The energy in the room is something I can't even put words on sometimes. And that last one, that what I've just been speaking about, the satisfaction, the fulfillment, the purpose of going in and teaching something that you know is valuable and somebody getting the upside and the result from that. I am really in a phenomenal position with those four currencies when I consider the business that I'm building for sales coaching. And I'm so, so glad to be doing it. One of the next sections I want to speak about is the support and the conversations that I've had during the last 6 weeks to ensure that I did really well, because it's easy to, when I'm talking about not gossiping and not getting into too many conversations and not telling too many people about the situation, it's easy to go for that whole sort of Sigma grind mode bro style. And that's not actually the case. You definitely do need the right people in your corner to support you and help you during that period. And I'm very fortunate with the circle that I've built, in particular over the last 5 years through the podcast and through my life choices. The people that I've ended up acquainted with have been perfectly positioned to support me during this time. I definitely took on board George Perez's lesson of not telling lots and lots of people, because when you talk too much about it, it can weigh you down and it can create a negative spiral. And you have to be very selective of who you tell. I will name check some of the people on the show, but there's been people outside of that I won't mention them by name. But first and foremost, I discussed it with my brother Ian, who, as well as being my brother, is one of my very, very best friends. We live together. We share a lot of the same interests and passions, and certainly some of the same values. So I told Ian straight off the bat, and Ian is such a realist, and he's always very straight to the point about any particular challenges or flaws he sees. And some of my friends will joke that Ian can be on the negative side or the pessimistic side occasionally, but I view him very much as a realist and somebody that's in my corner to tell me the things that I need to hear, even though sometimes some people won't tell you those things. And straight away, his questions were very much around, can you see yourself coaching for 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line and beyond? Because if so, then it makes more sense to go into it. Whereas if it was a quick flash in the pan or a quick parachute mission to do it for a short period of time to get yourself back on your feet, I think I would have been more inclined to explore other opportunities. So having that counsel there was very, very important, as well as, of course, the support that, not that this was the case because I thankfully had an emergency fund, and I think that's an important point to mention. I'm a big believer through different conversations with Andrew Craig, Damien Talks Money, Pete Matthew, these brilliant financial guys in the podcast, having 3 to 6 months of living expenses for your mortgage or your rent, your car payment, your food and your grocery bills, your gym membership, and maybe some of the non-negotiables you've got in your life, having that saved and in a readily available pot of cash, whether that's in your current account or whether that's in an asset that you can get access to really quickly, rather than having to sell off stock, shares, crypto, or another investment. Having that there allowed me the reassurance. So talking to Ian from a fiscal perspective to make sure that all our ducks in a row when it came to making sure that I could continue my contribution to the mortgage for the flat and maintain any of the other areas of my life that I wanted to. Beyond that, one of my very closest friends and somebody that's got a very similar mindset, and somebody you'll get to hear from on the show again, Bryce Bell, in the future when some of the things in his life are allow us to do so from a legal perspective, and I don't say that lightly. Bryce is somebody that we've bounced off each other so many times when hard times come, and we will speak about the very hard time in his life that I've been a strong part in supporting him through and pushing him through. He definitely did that too for me in this situation, where he held me to the account. The type of man that I say I am, I have to act in alignment with that. So we even joked, it's actually good that this has happened to me, because some people would not have been able to deal with it. Whereas I'm a big believer that the broadest shoulders carry the heaviest burden. And I was ready to carry this burden. I was ready to go for it. And Bryce held me to account in terms of, what are you working on? What's your plan? How often are you acting in it? Are you doing all that you can to make the best of this situation? And the conversations we had over the phone and over WhatsApp were really instructive and really valuable for me to have somebody in my corner that I had really high expectations of me. He held me to a really high standard, which I hold myself to. And having that external accountability to somebody that views me in a positive light in the same way that I view myself positively, that is a great combination to have. And you don't need people in your corner that are going to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry this has happened. That's so terrible. I'm so upset for you." Those people are saying that from a place of love and support. But I didn't need that. I didn't need somebody to be upset on my behalf. I needed somebody to say, "Okay, Colin, that's terrible. But what the fuck are you going to do now?" And I'm telling you, that's the type of friend that Bryce is for me. And I'm so, so grateful for it. From a strategic perspective, many of you will love the episodes that I do with Chris Burns, the Savage Scholar, or I think he's now rebranded to Story Seller Chris on Instagram. Chris is the copywriting guru who I'm so thankful I've had access to over the last few years to teach me about how to position some of the things online in terms of sales when I ran the podcast masterclass that I've got. And now when I'm going to run some of the sales coaching stuff that I've got, whether that's the video course that's coming up or some of the more entry level products that you'll get to work with me on, as well as the one-to-one coaching, being able to speak to somebody like Chris and put in place a plan for my email list, which is just relaunched, my newsletter that comes off the back of that, the resources I'm giving away for free within that to help people on their sales journey and show how good I can be to support them with that. Having somebody there to speak to about the different offers and the value I can give has been incredibly valuable and really, really important to have somebody to speak to about strategy and implementation. And again, the accountability of hiring him on a monthly retainer and being able to know that I'm going to do that work that he bounces back and forth between him and I, and get to a place where the offering I've got for people to work with me is even stronger than the existing one that I've got just now. And that's another really valuable person to speak to. And another person that, much like Bryce and much like some of the other really close friends that I told, they all knew self-employed Colin was coming at some point. They all knew it was coming. And when push came to shove, they all agreed that let's go for it then. Commit to it. Make it happen. Now's the time. I will also share a conversation I had with one of my sales coaching clients who he phoned me with an opportunity to work with a particular client that he could refer me into that was going to be really time intensive and actually would have been a bit of a challenge if I still had my day job to actually fulfill. And so at that point in time, I mentioned to him that things had changed. David Phillips had gone into admin and that I was fully doing this. And again, I wasn't speaking to all my clients about this initially because it wasn't important for them to know because it didn't impact delivery. If anything, it actually aided delivery because it opened up more time slots to work with me. And he still laughs about what I said because he said, "I'm really sorry to hear that you've been made redundant. That's terrible news." And I just stopped him and said, "It's not bad news. It's just news. Now is the time for me to launch more offerings, launch a video course, launch a low entry product that will allow people to get value through a PDF walkthrough or a video walkthrough, allow more people to work with me across the extra 40 hours I freed up one-to-one." And he laughed because he automatically thought, as many of us would from a polite perspective and a mannerly perspective, great British manners, are inherent, that you want to go into a comforting and a supportive mode. But he quickly realized that I told him I had a plan, I knew my next steps, I had total ownership and control with my mindset to overcome what is on the face a really shit situation where it's easy to feel like the victim of corporate mismanagement, of a major fuck up. Whereas my message that I put out into the world, that anyone I spoke to about this, anyone knew about this, was I've got control, I've got agency, I've got the ability to own the situation, I'm going to make the most of this. And he laughs because he says, only you could have said that. Now, not only me could have said that, many people that I know that are really resilient and well-built would say the same thing. But when people react like that towards you, it encourages you to keep leaning into that identity, keep leaning into that style of person, keep leaning into the almost ego of, I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about me. Just enable and help me in any way that you can. And let me just keep pushing forward. If you're new to the podcast, make sure you've hit the subscribe or the follow button on whatever platform you're listening on so I can keep getting fantastic guests just like this one. I wasn't sure if I was going to speak about this, but I am going to. I didn't tell either of my parents until Friday just gone, which was 5.5, 6 weeks after the redundancy, because I didn't want them to worry about me. And parents are conservative with a small c, not necessarily politically, but in terms of wanting you to take the safe option and wanting you to have the best possible support that you can. And a salary job is typically that, rather than being an entrepreneur, rather than being a business owner. And I didn't tell them because I didn't want to assign any bandwidth to them having to worry about me and me worrying about how I manage those comms and assigning time and energy into communicating with them what I was up to on a daily basis during that period, which was 8, 9, 10 hours on the laptop and lots of presentation writing, lots of emails and proposals, lots of delivery of coaching. And they were actually, on reflection, glad that I didn't put that burden on them, because they knew that they would have maybe been distracted or upset by it at a time where I didn't have the proof of the revenue I generated in July, the revenue I generated in August, and the pipeline I've got for September and October for people to be working with me. And you're looking for them to feel that you've got everything at hand, because at 32, you don't want your parents to be worrying about your livelihood. You don't want them to be worrying about your ability to pay your mortgage, to pay your car, to pay for your grocery, to pay for that David Lloyd membership, which is something that I value. And I definitely did it the right way, because when I went into that conversation with them, albeit I was a little bit nervous, although we'll reframe nerves as excitement, which Hannah Hughesman, one of my favorite early guests in the show, episode 120 odd, told me that was a massive reframe, because nerves and excitement come from the same place within your body. I went into that conversation a little bit up and a little bit on high dough, because I knew that they would maybe be initially upset that I didn't feel the need to tell them early, but I gave my reasons for it. I gave them the reassurance, and I wanted them to feel calm that I'd made the right decision, and I didn't want any bandwidth going towards discussions around applying for other jobs or not going full tilt at this and giving it all my all. I think when you consider challenges or curveballs or difficult periods within your life, being a strong individual is massive, but also having select people that you tell that you can gain reassurance, sometimes challenge and questions, sometimes support, an arm around the shoulder, sometimes a push and a kick and a shove in the right direction. Choose carefully who you tell and who you speak to, and ensure that they serve you best in getting to where you want to get to. And now, where I'm publicly speaking about this because I'm in a position where I feel comfortable doing so, you can speak about it as just another event in the wonderful story of life and where you've ended up. So now that all this bandwidth has been freed up, now that I've gone all in, now that I'm in a position to really kick on, the next steps are very, very simple. Keep building the client base, refine the offers and ways of working with me. The video course is coming soon, I promise. The entry level products and frameworks that you can download from the email list and through the Stripe link will be there as well. Scaling the podcast and continuing to have these fantastic conversations. That's one thing I want to reassure you on. We're not going anywhere. We're going to keep producing the weekly episodes. Depending on when this is released, I've just been in London for a tour. We've had Andrew Craig back on the podcast, who many of you love. We've had Eunice from Eunice Rock's YouTube channel, which is a huge and pretty powerful conversation on politics and democracy. We've got David Bell, who again is fantastic on the UK economic situation and the political situation. And then Miles Usher Doyle, who anyone that wants to speak better and be heard and communicate more strongly in your work or your business or your personal life will get a lot from that episode. So the podcast is going nowhere, but everything alongside it is just pushing forward and growing and going in that right direction. My long-term vision and my mission is to continue to have one of the best self-development podcasts in the UK, to take it to Dubai, to take it to London, to take it to Marbella, to take it to Mallorca, which is coming at the end of this month. And then, of course, have that hub there in Glasgow where Scottish entrepreneurs and business owners and individuals and athletes can come on and share their story. All of this is going in the right direction. From like a measurement perspective, come the next financial year for the business will be VAT registered, which is a great milestone. Albeit, I don't know if some of the grumblings from the lefty Labour government are lowering the VAT threshold is coming, which would be fucking bananas decision to make. But as it currently stands, the business will move in that direction, which of course is validation of the financial revenue coming in. And I just want to make sure that I remain resolute, I remain focused, I remain financially disciplined in terms of moving away from the structure of having a monthly salary from a corporate job and the commission that tops it up. I want to make sure that I've got that clarity of focus and vision and energy, which moves me in the right direction. And I want to keep producing amazing results. I want that feeling of satisfaction and fulfillment from working with people that I can help their business grow. I can help their career grow. And I know that through the podcast, I can help anyone that's not interested in sales or not particularly focused on it at this moment in time. I know that I can create a positive ripple effect with my story, my insights, as well as the wonderful guests that come on and share their advice, share their energy, share their story. As we get to the close of this episode, there's a few key takeaways. Sometimes you don't get to choose the timing, but you can choose how you respond. The timing of what happened to me, the timing of what happened with the business was completely out of my control. I did my part. I did the revenue, the profitability, the growth that was required at my end, but I was let down by another part of the world, by another part of the sector, by the other part of the business that I couldn't control. That was outside of my agency. But what I could control was how I responded in the days, the weeks, and the months and the years to come with my business, with my focuses, with my energy, and where I allocate it. And that is the same for anyone listening to this that gets hit by some sort of curveball they don't expect. You may not be able to choose what that curveball looks like. You certainly probably won't. But you can choose what you do off the back of it. A quote from one of my sales coaching clients, Dave Lewis, who works in the financial advice space that he uses a lot, is that you are in the business of you. So when it comes to you working for a corporate, when it comes to you working for another business owner, remember, especially if you're working for one that's owned by a large company that's maybe owned by private equity firms, or you're further removed from the business owner or the person that's running and calling the shots on a day-to-day basis, you must prioritize you. That's not to say not to have loyalty and not to have a focus on delivering for that business, but look after you. Look after your skills, look after your mindset, look after your health, and ensure that you have options open to you at all times. What might come if something goes sideways? And with the way the UK economy is going, things like the national insurance increase, things like them fucking around with the VAT threshold, and maybe some of the other punitive taxes that the Labour government are going to introduce. Be ready, because some businesses are really going to find challenge during this period. So invest in yourself, invest in your skill set, invest in your health and your wealth, and be in a position where you're able to respond should something like this happen to you. I am going to reflect in this period for a long time to come, and it's always going to be a milestone in my life. In the same way that 2019 redundancy was a milestone because I'd moved sector, I'd moved business, I landed on my feet, ended up at the world's biggest insurance broker in Marsh and got tremendous training, which I took to David Phillips to succeed in and be a success there and make a lot of sales where I was there. Anything that happens to you, use it as much as possible as a springboard or a launch pad after, of course, you've done that descent and jump out with the parachute. I'm genuinely grateful for the situation I find myself in, and I am proud of how I've behaved and acted off the back of what's happened to me. And I know that many of the people listening to this will hopefully take something away that they can enact in their own life in terms of that locus of control of the things that we can handle in our own life, which position us to dance in the rain, to bleed in battle rather than bleed in training. Sorry, to bleed in training rather than bleed in battle, and to be in a position where they're going to be a success regardless of what life throws at us. I want to say a massive thank you to the close network of people that I told that supported me through this period. I want to say thank you to all the listeners and the people that supported and shared the podcast, which has been a massive part of me having that network of people to work with and coach off the back of this. And I want to say thank you to the coaching clients that trusted me to come into their business, to come into their career, to come into their life and help them to optimize their sales process and to grow and to push forward, and for them investing their hard-earned money in something that they know has a return, but they chose me to be the guy to do that for them. I want to make it clear that I'm genuinely just getting started with this sales coaching, and there's going to be so much more to come that's going to be of massive value to you as an individual, whether you're somebody that's going to work with me direct or whether you're somebody that's just going to benefit from all the free content I'm going to create. If you're a business owner, an entrepreneur, or you manage or run a small sales team, or you're just somebody that wants to improve the selling or the communication skills that you've got in life, please do reach out. The email will be in the show notes, and also the link to join the new email list of my newsletter with weekly insights, lessons, and frameworks for you to implement will be there for you to get involved in. And for those of you listening to the podcast that continue to back me, continue to share the show. Please continue to put it in group chats, put it in your Instagram story, tag me at call.campbell, put it in your LinkedIn feed, tag me at Colin T. Campbell, and keep being part of the journey, because the shackles are well and truly off. I am completely free, completely ready to go. There's no topic off limits in the podcast now that my employer can get upset about. There's no area of the world that I can't travel to interview podcast guests and to bring you the best stories. And I am so, so excited for what's to come forward. Thank you all for listening. I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.